The auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through that fluorescent-lit room like a gunshot. $9. And just like that, an 18-year-old kid with $49 in my pocket and a 13-year-old sister gripping my hand so tight her knuckles had gone white, owned 52 acres of land that nobody else wanted. 6 hours earlier, we had a roof over our heads. Now we had a pile of rotting logs on top of a mountain. And that was everything. My name is Caleb Thornton, and this is the story of how my sister Rosie and I went from sleeping in a broken-down pickup truck with $11 between us to building something that $1 million offer couldn't buy. But more than that, this is a story about what family really means, and how sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who actually loves you. It started, like most disasters do, with something small, a letter. I need to take you back to that morning, October 14th, because if you're going to understand what happened next, you need to understand what that house on Birchwood Lane in Millbrook, North Carolina was really like. I'd lived there for 6 years, ever since my mother, Diane, married Glenn Whitmore in a courthouse ceremony that neither Rosie nor I had been invited to attend. I was 12 then. Rosie was 7. We found out about it when they came home with matching rings and told us to call him Dad. I never did. Glenn Whitmore was not a cruel man in the way you see in movies. He never raised his hand to us. He never screamed or threw things or made threats. What he did was somehow worse. He looked through us, the way you look through a window at something more interesting on the other side, like we were furniture that had come with the house, inconvenient, slightly in the way, but not worth the effort of removing. I could handle that. I'd been handling it for 6 years. What I couldn't handle was watching what it did to my mother. My mother, Diane Whitmore now, though she'd been Diane Thornton when I was born, had been beautiful once, in old photographs. She had the kind of face that photographs well but fades fast under stress. And stress had been her constant companion since my father walked out when I was 7 and Rosie was barely 2. James Thornton. That was his name. I don't know if Rosie even remembers him. I remember the smell of cigarettes and engine oil. I remember him teaching me to throw a baseball in the backyard. I remember the sound of the front door closing one Tuesday morning and thinking nothing of it because doors close all the time. He never came back. No note, no phone call, no forwarding address. One day he was there, and the next day he was a ghost. And my mother spent the next 5 years becoming a ghost too, just a quieter, slower kind. When Glenn came along, I think she saw him as a life raft, someone stable, someone who wouldn't leave. And maybe that was true. Glenn was stable the way a rock is stable, cold, immovable, and completely indifferent to anything that wasn't himself. But she loved him, or she loved not being alone. And when you've been abandoned once, the fear of it happening again can make you do things you'll spend the rest of your life trying to forgive yourself for. I know that now. I didn't know it then. On the morning of October 14th, I came downstairs to find Glenn sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper held between 2 fingers like it was something diseased. My acceptance letter. Ashford Community College. I'd applied in secret 3 months earlier, using the address of my best friend Danny Kowalski's house because I knew with absolute certainty what would happen if Glenn found out. I'd used the school library computers. I'd walked the application to the post office myself. I'd done everything right, but somehow he'd found it. To this day, I don't know how. Maybe he searched my room. Maybe it fell out of my jacket. The how doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that when I walked into that kitchen, Glenn looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, something colder. "Sit down," he said. I sat. Rosie was at the table too, eating cereal, her sketchbook open beside her bowl. She was always drawing something. The window, the tree outside, the cat from next door. That morning she was drawing the sugar bowl, and she didn't look up, but I saw her hand go still on the pencil. She knew something was wrong. "You want to tell me what this is?" Glenn set the letter on the table. "It's an acceptance letter. To college." "Yes. Using Danny Kowalski's address. Like you're ashamed of this house. Like you didn't want anyone here to know." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. And this financial aid application, he pulled out another paper. You listed household income, my private financial information, sent to some government office without my permission. It's required for... I didn't ask for an explanation. The kitchen went so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Rosie had stopped pretending to draw. Her eyes were moving between Glenn and me like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. 6 years, Glenn said. 6 years under my roof. Groceries, utilities, a bed to sleep in. And this is the thanks I get. Secrets. Going behind my back. You're 18 years old, Caleb. You're an adult now. And if you want to act like you don't need this family, then maybe you don't need this family. My mother was standing at the counter with her coffee cup. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. Glenn, she said softly. No. He held up a hand. He wants to go to college so badly. He can figure out how to do that on his own. I want him out by noon. The words landed in the kitchen like stones dropped in still water. I looked at my mother. She looked at her coffee cup. 6 seconds. That's how long the silence lasted. I counted. 6 seconds where my mother could have said something, anything, to stop what was happening. She turned the cup in her hands, and in that gesture, I understood everything I needed to understand about what my place in that house had always been. Rosie, I said, standing up, go pack your things. Glenn's head snapped toward me. Excuse me? She's my sister. She goes where I go. She's 13 years old. She's not going anywhere. Then call the police. I met his eyes. Explain to them why you're kicking out an 18-year-old and his 13-year-old sister with nowhere to go. Explain what kind of man does that. I saw something flicker in his expression. Not guilt. Glenn wasn't capable of guilt, but something like calculation. Something like realizing how this would look to the neighbors. Fine, he said. Take her. Take whatever you want. But don't come back expecting me to fix it when you realize you can't make it on your own. Rosie was already out of her chair, moving toward the stairs. She understood. She always understood more than anyone gave her credit for. I went to my room and packed what I could fit in 2 garbage bags. It didn't take long. I didn't have much. Some clothes, a few books, the baseball glove my father had given me when I was 5. The only thing I had left of him. When I came back downstairs, Glenn was in the living room watching television. Like nothing had happened. Like this was just another Tuesday morning. My mother was in the doorway to the kitchen. Caleb, honey. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Just give him a few days to calm down. You know how he gets. I'll talk to him, and... It's okay, Mom. And the terrible thing was that it actually was okay. In the way that a bone-breaking clean is somehow less complicated than one that splinters. Clean breaks heal straight. This break was clean. Take care of yourself, I said. I didn't hug her. I didn't look back. I walked down the driveway to my truck, a 2002 Ford Ranger I'd bought with 16 months of weekend wages from Merle Dunbar's hardware store on Route 64, and I loaded the garbage bags into the bed. Rosie was already in the passenger seat, her backpack on her lap, her face pale but dry. She didn't cry until we were 3 blocks away. Then she cried so hard I had to pull over because I couldn't see the road through my own tears. We sat there on the side of Maple Street for maybe 20 minutes, holding on to each other in that cramped truck cab, while the world we'd known fell away behind us, and the world ahead remained completely, terrifyingly blank. When the tears finally stopped, Rosie wiped her face with her sleeve and said, "Where are we going?" I didn't have an answer, so I drove to the only place I could think of. Barbara Kowalski opened her front door before I even knocked. She must have seen the truck from the window. She took one look at the garbage bags in the bed, one look at Rosie's red-rimmed eyes, and she pulled us both inside without asking a single question. She sat us at her kitchen table and put food in front of us. Scrambled eggs and toast and orange juice and coffee so strong it could strip paint. She moved around that kitchen with the quiet efficiency of a woman who has raised children through hard times and knows that sometimes the most important thing you can do is make sure someone has a full stomach before you ask them what's wrong. Danny came downstairs in his pajamas, saw the garbage bags in the hallway, and sat down across from me without a word. "How long do you need to stay?" he asked. "We're not staying." Barbara stopped mid-pour with the coffee pot. "The hell you're not. I mean it." I looked up at her, at this woman who had treated me like a second son every time I'd walked through her kitchen door for the past 6 years. "I can't. If I stay here, I'll just be waiting for someone else to solve it, and nobody's going to solve it. Caleb, I need to figure something out on my own." Barbara looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly because she understood something that took me years to fully appreciate, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a young person is let them make their own choices, even when those choices scare you. "Okay," she said, "but you eat first, and you come back if you need to. The door's always open. You hear me? Always." It was Danny who gave me the idea. We were sitting in his room that afternoon while Rosie was downstairs helping Barbara make pierogi, something to do with her hands, something to keep her mind off the fact that our lives had just imploded. And Danny said almost offhandedly, "You know, Merle was talking the other day about the county tax auctions." "The what?" "Tax auctions. When people don't pay their property taxes, the county seizes the land and sells it off. Merle said you can get parcels for almost nothing if nobody else wants them." I sat up straighter. "How much is almost nothing?" "I don't know. $10? 20? The stuff nobody bids on goes for basically whatever anyone's willing to pay." It was a crazy idea. I knew it was a crazy idea. I was 18 years old with $49 in my pocket, a 13-year-old sister depending on me, and no skills beyond basic carpentry I'd picked up from watching the guys at Merle's store. But crazy was all I had. The next auction was in 3 days. I slept in the truck that night. Rosie stayed with Barbara, who wouldn't hear of her sleeping anywhere else. Parked in the lot behind the Hardys on Main Street with a sleeping bag Danny had lent me and the heater running until the cab got too cold, then shutting off to save gas, then running again when I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. I ate a gas station sandwich for dinner and a bruised apple for breakfast and spent the hours in between staring at the ceiling of that truck cab, making a list in my head. The list had one item: don't quit. The Henderson County tax auction was held on a Thursday morning in a fluorescent-lit room at the county administration building that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. There were maybe 30 people in folding chairs, mostly older men in work coats, a few sharp-suited investors tapping at phones, a woman from a local property management company who everyone seemed to know by name. I sat in the back row in my Carhartt jacket with $49 in my wallet and my sister beside me, her hand in mine, her sketchbook in her lap. The properties came up one by one. A vacant lot on Highway 9. Opening bid $200. Sold in seconds for $800. A condemned house on Miller Street. Opening bid $500. Sold for $2,000. A commercial plot near the interstate. I didn't even hear the opening bid before 3 investors were shouting over each other. I watched my chances narrow with every gavel strike. Then the auctioneer, a heavy-set man named Dale Pittman, who had the board efficiency of someone who'd done this job for 2 decades too long, read out Parcel 44A. 52 acres on Crestwood Mountain Road, Blue Ridge Foothills, timberland, rough access road, derelict structure on property, taxes owed $327, minimum opening bid $9. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Someone in the front row muttered, "What's on it? An outhouse?" Nobody raised a paddle. I raised my hand. $9. Dale Pittman looked up from his papers and squinted at the back of the room. $9. Do I hear 15? Silence. Going once. Rosie squeezed my hand so tight I could feel the bones grinding together. Going twice. The gavel came down. Sold to the young man in the back for $9. The room moved on to the next parcel. I sat very still, holding that number paddle in both hands, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. I paid my $9 at the cashier's window, plus $327 in back taxes. That left me with $11 and some change. $11. A 13-year-old sister and 52 acres of land I'd never seen. We drove out to Crestwood Mountain Road that same afternoon. The access road was barely a road, more of a suggestion left behind by someone's tire tracks years ago. Two shallow ruts through red clay and scrub growth, winding up the mountain through thick stands of oak and pine. The truck bounced and scraped for nearly a mile before the trees opened up and I saw it. The cabin. Rosie said, "It looks like it wants to die." She wasn't wrong. The structure sat in a small clearing, and it wasn't just old. It was exhausted. It looked like something that had given up and was simply waiting for someone to come along and make it official. One corner of the roof had collapsed inward, creating a dark wound in the shingling that disappeared into shadow. The porch had separated from the front wall and tilted at a drunken angle into the weeds. Two of the four windows were completely gone, the openings covered with what had once been plywood, but was now something closer to wet cardboard. The logs themselves, actual hand-hewn logs, cut from the look of them maybe a century ago, had gone dark with moisture and were in some places fuzzy with green moss. But the logs were still there, and they were enormous, old-growth timber, the kind they stopped cutting decades ago because there wasn't any left to cut. Trunks that had been ancient when this cabin was built, that had survived storms and droughts and fires and everything else the mountain could throw at them. I walked the perimeter, knocking on logs with my knuckles the way I'd watched Merle Dunbar do when examining lumber. Pressing my thumb against the wood in different places, feeling for soft spots, for give, for rot. Maybe 30% was truly compromised. The rest was solid. I stood in front of that cabin as the October sun dropped behind the ridge and turned the sky the color of a wood stove fire, deep orange fading to purple at the edges, and I made a decision. "This is home," I said. Rosie looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but sometimes losing your mind is the first step toward finding something better. "Okay," she said, and just like that, with one word from a 13-year-old girl who had been kicked out of her house that same morning, who had every right to demand something better, something safer, something that made sense. With one word, we were in this together. We slept in the truck that night, but for the first time since leaving Birchwood Lane, we slept on our own land. That made all the difference. If you've been following along this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stood at a crossroads where everyone else thought you were crazy? Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and building something of your own? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if you want to find out what happened when two teenagers tried to rebuild a century-old cabin with $11 and no experience, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happened next, I never could have predicted it. Let me be very clear about something. What followed was not a montage. It wasn't a highlight reel with inspirational music where everything magically comes together in 3 minutes. It was 8 months of cold, injury, setback, humiliation, and the kind of grinding daily labor that has no audience and no applause, and requires you to find your motivation from somewhere deep inside yourself, a place that doesn't care about being watched. Our first problem was practical. I had no money and no power tools. Our second problem was knowledge. I'd grown up in suburban houses where maintenance meant calling a handyman. I'd watched Merle Dunbar's crew at the hardware store work on projects, absorb things by proximity the way you absorb language in a foreign country. But actually doing it, that was different. The third problem was one I hadn't anticipated. We weren't alone on that mountain. 3 days after we'd set up camp, and I use the term loosely because our camp consisted of a truck bed, 2 sleeping bags, a camp stove, and a blue tarp strung between trees. I drove down the mountain looking for anyone who might know something about the property's history. I found Earl Maddox. He was in his driveway about 4 miles down the road, splitting firewood with the methodical efficiency of a man who has done something 10,000 times and no longer needs to think about it. He was 74 years old, though I didn't know that then. All I knew was that his face looked like it had been outside in all weathers for 6 decades, creased, watchful, the color of old saddle leather. I stopped the truck and got out. "Excuse me, sir." He didn't look up, just kept swinging that splitting maul in perfect rhythm. Thunk, turn, stack, thunk, turn, stack. I just bought the property up the road, the cabin on Crestwood. I was wondering if you knew anything about it. Thunk, turn, stack. Please, sir, I'm trying to fix it up, but I don't know where to start. I don't even know who owned it before. He stopped then, set down the maul, looked at me with eyes that were pale blue and very sharp despite his age. The Harker cabin, he said. Sir? That's what we used to call it. The Harker place. Been empty 30 years now. Since the fire. What fire? But he was already turning away, walking toward his house. I thought I'd offended him somehow, asked the wrong question, pried into something I shouldn't have. Then he stopped at the door and looked back. Well, you coming in or not? My wife's not here anymore to make the coffee, but I can manage that much. I followed him inside. His house was small but immaculate, the kind of clean that comes from living alone and having nothing else to do but maintain order. The walls were covered with photographs. A woman with silver hair and kind eyes appeared in almost everyone. Ruth, I would later learn, his wife of 47 years. She died 5 years earlier, and Earl had been slowly fading ever since, like a plant that keeps living after you've stopped watering it, but has forgotten why. He poured 2 cups of coffee, black and strong, and sat down across from me at his kitchen table. Now, he said, tell me what exactly you're trying to do up there. So I told him, everything. The college letter, Glenn's ultimatum, my mother's silence, the auction, the $11, Rosie sleeping in the truck bed. I told him about the rotting porch and the collapsed roof and the windows that were more holes than glass. I told him I didn't have any idea what I was doing, but I was going to do it anyway because there was no other option. When I finished, Earl was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, you can work from 5 in the morning until dark without complaining? Yes, sir. You can take instruction without getting defensive? Yes, sir. You can fail at something 10 times and try it an 11th? Yes, sir. He nodded slowly like I'd passed some test I hadn't known I was taking. Come back Saturday, he said. We'll start with the roof. I started to thank him, but he waved it off. Don't thank me yet. I'm not going to be gentle with you. I don't have time for gentle anymore. What Earl Maddox gave me over the following months was not charity. It was mentorship of the old-fashioned kind, where the teacher is strict and demanding and doesn't praise you for the ordinary because the ordinary is expected. Earl had been a carpenter his entire life. He'd built 2 structures on his own property by hand. He'd learned from his father, who'd learned from his grandfather, and the knowledge had been passed down the way knowledge gets passed down in families that can't afford to outsource their problems. Through demonstration, repetition, and the occasional sharp word when you weren't paying attention. The first 2 months were about survival. November in the Blue Ridge Mountains is not gentle. The temperature dropped below freezing most nights, and even with the cabin's walls intact, the gaps in the logs let the cold seep through like water through a sieve. Rosie and I piled every blanket we had onto the truck bed and huddled together like puppies, our breath making clouds in the air. I worked on the roof first because Earl said shelter was everything. You can survive without electricity. You can survive without running water, but you cannot survive without a roof over your head, not through a Carolina mountain winter. So we patched, we tarred, we hauled new shingles up the mountain in the bed of the truck, bought with money I was still earning on weekends at Merle Dunbar's store, my one remaining lifeline to the working world. In December, I fell off the roof. Not far, maybe 6 feet, but I landed wrong, and for 3 days I could barely move. My back had turned into a solid wall of bruised muscle, and every breath felt like someone was driving nails into my spine. Rosie took over. She was 13 years old, and she climbed up that ladder every morning at 6 and worked until she couldn't lift her arms anymore. She didn't complain. She didn't ask when I'd be better. She just did what needed doing, the way she'd been doing since the day we left Birchwood Lane. That was when I understood that I wasn't just protecting her anymore. We were protecting each other. It was during one of those early repairs that I found the first clue about who had lived here before us. We were pulling up rotted floorboards near the back corner of the cabin. Wood so soft you could push your thumb through it, when Rosie's crowbar hit something that didn't sound like wood. Metal. I got down on my knees and reached into the gap between the floor joists. My fingers closed around a tin box, rusted shut, maybe 8 inches long. "What is it?" Rosie asked. I didn't know. It took me 20 minutes with a screwdriver and a hammer to pry it open. Inside, protected by decades of darkness, were photographs. Black and white at first, then fading color. A family standing in front of this very cabin. A man and woman, 3 children, smiling at the camera with the easy confidence of people who belonged exactly where they were. On the back of one photograph, in faded pencil, "The Harker family, 1967. Harker, the same name Earl had mentioned. I put the box on a shelf and told myself I'd investigate later, when there was time. But the name stayed with me, turning over in my mind like a stone in a riverbed, smoothing down to something I couldn't quite ignore. Who were the Harkers, and what had happened to them? In March, I stepped through a section of flooring I'd replaced incorrectly. The wood had looked solid, but underneath it was rot I hadn't caught, and my leg went through to the knee. A splinter the length of my hand drove into my calf. By the time I managed to pull myself out, my jeans were soaked with blood, and I couldn't walk. Earl drove me to the hospital in Ashford. The doctor said I was lucky. Another inch to the left, and the splinter would have hit an artery. They cleaned the wound, stitched it up, gave me antibiotics and a tetanus shot, and a bill for $2,400. I stared at that bill in the hospital parking lot and felt something close to despair. $2,400. I had maybe 50 to my name. "Don't worry about it," Earl said. "What?" "The bill. It's taken care of." "How?" "Old insurance policy. From when Ruth was sick. Still had some left on it." I knew he was lying. Earl didn't have insurance. He paid cash for everything because he'd grown up in a time when you didn't trust banks or corporations or anyone who asked you to sign papers. But I also knew that pointing out the lie would mean acknowledging a kindness he wasn't ready to admit to. So I just said, "Thank you," and we went back to work. Rosie took care of me for 2 weeks while my leg healed. She changed the bandages. She made soup on the camp stove. She read to me from the books Patricia Odom had brought from the library, how-to manuals mostly on plumbing and electrical work and carpentry, but also a few novels that Rosie picked out herself. Patricia Odom was another piece of the web that was slowly forming around us. She'd worked at the Henderson County Library for 28 years and had developed an uncanny ability to match the right book to the right person. When I walked in that first time and explained, somewhat awkwardly, that I needed to learn construction and plumbing, and maybe electrical systems too, she didn't blink. She came back with a stack of books that looked impossible and said, "Start with the one on top." After that, she started bringing books to us. Would drive up the mountain road every couple of weeks with a fresh stack, stay for coffee, ask how things were progressing. She never made a big deal of it, never acted like it was charity. Just said she was checking on library property and figured she might as well check on us too. And then there was Merle Dunbar. Merle owned the hardware store where I'd worked weekends for almost 2 years. He was a compact, no-nonsense man in his early 60s who had a policy of not getting involved in his employees' personal lives. But when he figured out what we were trying to do, pieced it together from overheard conversations and the specific materials I asked about, something changed. He started pulling me aside at the end of shifts. "Got a return on a box of timber screws. Nobody wants them. You might as well take them. Supplier sent extra caulking by mistake, going in the dumpster otherwise. This generator's been sitting in the back for 3 years. I'll let it go for $50, but you can pay me whenever." It wasn't charity. Merle was too proud for that, and he sensed I was too. It was the kind of sideways generosity that lets both parties maintain their dignity. It wasn't until 2 months into our work together that Earl told me why he was really helping us. We were sitting on the porch, still crooked then, not yet repaired, drinking coffee as the sun came up over the ridge. The light was that pale gold color it gets in early spring, when the world is just starting to remember what warmth feels like. Earl was quiet for a long time. Then he said very softly, like he was talking to himself more than to me, "I had a son once." I waited. "William, good boy, smart. Too smart for this mountain, I always thought. He wanted to go to college, be somebody. His mother and I, we didn't understand it. We were hard people, Caleb, set in our ways. We thought staying close to home was loyalty. Thought wanting more was the same as saying what we had wasn't enough. He took a long drink of his coffee. We fought about it. The night before he was supposed to leave. Said terrible things. Both of us. And the next morning, he was gone. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't leave a note. Just gone. Did he ever come back? Earl set down his coffee cup, and I saw that his hands were shaking. 25 years. Not a phone call. Not a letter. Not even a postcard to let us know he was alive. He stared out at the mountains, and I could see the weight of all those years pressing down on him. Ruth, my wife, she never stopped waiting. Every time a car came up that road, she'd go to the window. Every Christmas, she'd set an extra place at the table. Just in case. She did that for 22 years, Caleb. 22 years of hoping. His voice cracked. She died 3 months after the diagnosis. Cancer. And the last thing she said to me, the very last thing, was tell William I forgive him. When he comes home, tell him I was never angry, just sad. He wiped his eyes with the back of his weathered hand. He never came. She died still waiting, and I've been waiting ever since, even though I know he's not coming. Even though I know I'll die waiting too. He turned to look at me then, and his pale blue eyes were wet but steady. That's why I'm helping you, because you didn't run. You got knocked down harder than William ever was, and you stayed. You're building instead of burning. And maybe if someone had helped William build something of his own, he wouldn't have needed to destroy everything else to feel free. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, thank you, and we went back to work. By April, we had a solid roof. By May, we had patched floors, 2 working windows, and a wood stove that Earl helped us install using a reclaimed chimney flue. By June, we had running water from a well we'd cleared and primed, electricity from that old generator, and a kitchen that functioned in the essential sense of the word. The cabin was not beautiful yet, but it was alive. And then Danny Kowalski came up the mountain with his camera, and everything changed. It was a Saturday in late June. Danny had driven up ostensibly to help clear brush from the south side of the property, but he'd also brought his camera, a mirrorless digital he'd bought secondhand and was teaching himself to use. Somewhere around mid-afternoon, with the light coming through the trees at that golden angle that only happens for about 40 minutes on a clear summer day, Danny looked up from his work and saw me standing on the repaired porch of the cabin. I had a coffee cup in my hand. I was looking out over the ridge, watching the mountains fold into each other in shades of green and blue, completely unaware of being watched. Behind me, the cabin stood in that golden light, the old logs warm and dark, the new timber of the porch trim still bright, the whole structure somehow both ancient and newly alive. Rosie was sitting on the steps with her sketchbook, drawing the view, her dark hair catching the light. Danny took the photograph. He didn't say anything about it. That night, he posted it to Instagram with a simple caption. My friend bought an abandoned cabin for $9 when he was 18. 8 months later, this is what he and his 13-year-old sister built, mostly by themselves, with almost no money. By the next morning, it had 40,000 likes. By Monday, it had been picked up by 3 regional news outlets, a homesteading Facebook group with 2 million members, and a website called Rural Revival that covered sustainable living and off-grid projects across America. I didn't have reliable internet access. I found out what had happened when I drove down to Danny's house that Tuesday and walked into absolute chaos. Danny's phone was ringing constantly. His inbox was overflowing. There were interview requests from news stations in Asheville, Charlotte, and Raleigh. A production company in Nashville had emailed about documentary possibilities. A man named Stephen Gardner, who turned out to be a YouTuber in the homesteading space with over 1 million subscribers, had personally messaged asking for an introduction. I sat at Danny's kitchen table and stared at the screen. What do you want to do? Danny asked. I thought about it carefully. I thought about all the ways sudden attention could go wrong. I thought about being 8 months ago, eating a gas station sandwich in a dark parking lot, making a list with one item on it. I thought about what this property could become if we actually had resources. I want to start a YouTube channel, I said. Danny grinned so wide it looked like it hurt. I was hoping you'd say that. I never imagined that a single photograph could change everything. From two kids sleeping in a truck with $11, we went to 400,000 people watching our journey unfold. But that wasn't the biggest twist, because just when everything started going right, someone showed up who wanted to take it all away. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Who do you think tried to destroy our dream? We called the channel Thornton Ridge. Danny became the camera operator and editor. Rosie took over social media. She turned out to have a natural eye for what people wanted to see, for the moments that felt real rather than staged. I became the on-camera presence, though presence is a generous word for my early appearances. I was awkward, soft-spoken, never sure where to look. I was more comfortable working with my hands than talking to a lens. But there was something about the authenticity that connected with people in a way no amount of polish could manufacture. We were genuinely doing this. Every repair was real. Every mistake was real. Every moment of quiet satisfaction when something worked. That was real too. Within 6 months, Thornton Ridge had 400,000 subscribers. The money was small at first, then growing. It went entirely back into the property. Better insulation, new windows, a kitchen renovation that we documented in 4 episodes that collectively pulled in 8 million views. And then Hannah Mercer sent an email. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, buried in the flood of messages that came through the channel's contact form every day. Most of them were fan mail, encouraging words from people who'd watched our journey and found something in it that resonated with their own lives. Some were requests, people wanting us to promote their products, feature their businesses, collaborate on content. Hannah's email was different. She was 23 years old from Knoxville, Tennessee. She'd found Thornton Ridge during a particularly difficult stretch of her own life. A broken engagement to a man who turned out to be someone she'd invented rather than actually known. A desk job at an insurance company that paid adequately and drained her completely. The particular kind of directionlessness that ambushes you in your early 20s when you realize the plan you've been following isn't actually yours. She'd watched the channel obsessively for 3 weeks straight, starting from episode 1, watching me make mistakes in real time, and fix them in real time, and keep going in real time. And something about the honesty of it had cracked something open in her that she hadn't known was sealed shut. Her email was plain and direct. I want to learn something real because I feel like I've been learning nothing real for too long. I'm not afraid of hard work, but I'm honest that I have no experience. I understand completely if the answer is no. I'd received similar messages before. I'd declined them all. But Hannah's email felt different. It felt like someone telling the truth. I said yes. She arrived in April of our second year on the mountain with steel-toed work boots, a duffel bag, a library book on timber joinery, and absolutely no pretensions about what she was walking into. She was slender and dark-haired, with an observant quality to her face. The look of someone who processes things inwardly before speaking, who watches carefully before acting. Within 3 hours of arriving, she'd identified 2 things on the property that needed doing that nobody had gotten around to, picked up the appropriate tools without being asked, and started doing them. Earl showed up the next morning, took one look at her replacing a rotted section of the woodshed, cladding with clean, careful cuts, and said to me, not even lowering his voice, "Where'd you find her?" "She found me," I said. "She stayed 2 weeks. Then she drove back to Knoxville. 1 week later, my phone rang. It was Hannah. "I quit my job," she said. "I sold my furniture. I'm driving back up the mountain, if you'll have me." I didn't hesitate. "Drive safe," I said. "I'll leave the porch light on." Our relationship didn't announce itself. It built the way structures on the property built, slowly with intention, with the understanding that anything worth having needs a proper foundation before you start raising walls. We came to know each other in the particular intimacy of shared physical labor, where there's no performance because you're too tired for performance, where a person reveals themselves through how they handle frustration, how they respond to failure, whether they keep their word when keeping it is hard. Rosie loved her immediately. For the first time since our mother had failed us, she had someone who felt like an older sister. Someone who braided her hair and taught her to cook something other than camp stove soup and stayed up late talking about books and boys and dreams. By the time the first guest cabin was complete, neither Hannah nor I was pretending we were only friends. We just hadn't said the other thing yet. But then we found something in the old storage shed that changed everything we thought we knew about this property and about my family. It was a metal lockbox hidden under 30 years of accumulated debris. Hannah found it while we were clearing space for a new workshop. Inside were documents, old documents, a deed to the property dated 1952, more photographs, the same family I'd seen in the tin box, but across more years, and a handwritten journal, the pages yellowed and brittle with age. The journal belonged to Eleanor Harker. I read it over 3 nights, sitting by the wood stove, Hannah beside me, Rosie curled up in the armchair, pretending to read but actually listening to every word. Eleanor wrote about building this cabin with her husband Robert in 1952, and about raising 3 children here, and about the hard winters and the good summers, and the way the light came through the windows on autumn mornings, and about the fire. August 1975. A forest fire that swept through the mountains so fast there was no time to evacuate. Robert and Eleanor and 2 of their children didn't make it out. Only one survived, their youngest son, 15 years old. His name was James. I stopped breathing when I read that. James Harker, who later changed his name, I would discover from county records, to James Thornton, my father. This cabin, this pile of rotting logs that I'd bought for $9 at a tax auction, had belonged to my grandparents. The grandparents I'd never known existed. The grandparents my father had never told me about because the guilt of surviving when they didn't had broken something in him that could never be fixed. He'd run away from this mountain the same way he'd later run away from us. Not because he didn't love us, because love was too heavy to carry. And somehow, through random chance or fate or whatever you want to call it, I'd found my way back. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, almost exactly 2 years after Glenn Whitmore had kicked us out of that house on Birchwood Lane. I was on the roof of what had become our second structure, a guest cabin I'd been building from scratch, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I was in the middle of laying ridge cap shingles, and the morning light was perfect, and I'd learned to protect my work windows jealously. But something made me pick up. "Mr. Thornton?" The voice was smooth, professional. "My name is Victor Crane. I represent a company called Sterling Ridge Development Corporation. We've become aware of your property through Thornton Ridge, naturally. 800,000 subscribers is impressive. Thank you. We're interested in purchasing the property, all 52 acres. We're prepared to offer $1.5 million. I stood very still on that rooftop. $1.5 million. 2 years ago, I'd had $11 to my name. That's a generous offer, I said. It is, and it's negotiable. We understand the property has significant sentimental value. We're willing to work with you on a timeline that I'm not interested in selling. Silence on the other end. When Victor Crane spoke again, his voice had changed. The smoothness was still there, but underneath it was something with edges. "Mr. Thornton, I'd encourage you to think carefully about this. There are some complexities around the original tax auction, questions about proper notification procedures, about the validity of the transfer. I'm not saying there's anything wrong necessarily, but these things can get tied up in legal proceedings for years. Very expensive years." I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. "Is that a threat?" "It's information, and there are the road access easements to consider. County regulations can be quite particular about what constitutes legal access to a property. I'd hate to see you invest more in this place only to discover you can't actually reach it. I appreciate your concern. I hope so, because we're going to keep making offers, Mr. Thornton, and eventually you're going to realize that taking one of them is the smartest thing you could do." He hung up. I stood on that roof for a long time, watching the mountains, feeling something cold settling into my stomach. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the understanding that we'd built something worth taking. What followed was not pleasant. Sterling Ridge Development didn't attack us directly. They were too smart for that. Instead, they attacked our edges. Rumors started spreading through Millbrook. Whispers about those kids who'd somehow gotten land that should have gone to someone else. Questions about whether the tax auction had been legitimate. Insinuations that the whole YouTube thing was a scam, a performance, a con job. Someone vandalized the road up the mountain, dumped rocks, and felled a tree across the access point, forcing us to spend 2 days clearing it before we could get supplies through. And then there were the online attacks. Rosie bore the worst of it. She was 15 by then, managing our social media accounts with a professionalism that belied her age. She was the one who had to read the comments calling us frauds. The one who opened messages that said we should die. The one who saw our story twisted and weaponized by people who'd never met us. One night I found her crying in the cabin, her phone dark on the table in front of her. And when I asked what was wrong, she showed me the message she'd just received. I can't repeat what it said. I can tell you that it made me want to find whoever sent it and hurt them in ways I'm not proud of thinking about. Maybe we should just sell, Rosie said. Her voice was small in a way I hadn't heard since the night we left Birchwood Lane. Maybe it's not worth it. Maybe. No. Earl's voice came from the doorway. I hadn't heard him come up the porch steps, but there he was, 76 years old, his face like carved stone in the lamplight. No, he said again, softer. He came and sat beside Rosie and took her hand in both of his, hands that had built houses and buried a wife, and written letters to a son who never wrote back. You don't quit because it gets hard. If you quit every time it gets hard, you never build anything. And you two, he looked at me, then back at her. You two have built something, something real, something those men in suits couldn't build in 100 years. They're going to keep coming, Rosie said. So let them come. What are they going to do? Take your lumber? Tear down your walls? They can't take what you know. They can't take what you've learned. They can't take the people who love you. He squeezed her hand. You've got more than they'll ever have. And they know it. That's why they're scared. The solution came from an unexpected place. Raymond Cho was a property attorney in Ashford who'd found Thornton Ridge through the internet and watched it the way a lot of people watched it. First out of curiosity, then out of genuine investment in our story. He reached out through the channel's contact form with a simple message. I think I can help. No charge. At first I was skeptical. In my experience, nothing valuable came free. But Raymond was different. He'd grown up poor in a small town not unlike Millbrook. He'd put himself through law school on scholarships and determination. He understood what it meant to build something from nothing, and he understood what it felt like to have someone try to take it away. He spent 3 weeks in the county records office, and what he found changed everything. The property, my grandparents' property, though I hadn't known that when I bought it, had a complicated history. But buried in that history, in documents dating back to 1947, was something that Sterling Ridge Development had either missed or hoped we would never discover. The 52 acres sat above a natural spring. Not just any spring, a significant water source that, according to a hydrological survey from 1952, fed the water table for a substantial portion of the surrounding watershed. That's why they wanted the land, not for development, for water rights. Control the water, and you control everything downstream. The day I uploaded the video, the real reason they want my land, I didn't know what would happen. I just knew that people deserved to know the truth. 4 million views in the first week. Environmental groups reached out. A state legislator called. A journalist from the Charlotte Observer wrote a front-page piece about corporate land grabs in rural North Carolina that triggered a formal state inquiry. Victor Crane stopped calling. Sterling Ridge Development quietly withdrew their offers and their legal threats. And the land, my grandparents' land, was placed under historic preservation status, protected from development forever. We won, but I need to stop here for a moment, because the victory over Sterling Ridge, as satisfying as it was, wasn't the real victory. The real victory was what came next. Something I never expected, something that changed everything I thought I knew about family, about forgiveness, about what it means to truly come home. If this story has been speaking to you, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because what I'm about to tell you about my mother, about the letter my grandparents left behind, about the choice I had to make, this is the part that still makes me cry when I think about it. Stay with me. The channel passed 1 million subscribers. And then on a February evening when snow was falling heavy on the ridge and the cabin was warm with wood stove heat and Hannah was making dinner in the kitchen I'd rebuilt board by board, Barbara Kowalski called. "Your mother's been trying to reach me," she said. I felt everything in my body go still. "Glenn left her about 10 months ago. She's living in a rental apartment on the other side of Millbrook now. She's been watching your channel, Caleb. Every single episode. What does she want? She wants to see you. Both of you. She wants to apologize." I didn't call her that night. I sat with it for 4 days, turning it over like a stone in my hand, trying to understand the weight of it. Rosie found me on the porch on the 4th night, staring at the stars. "You're thinking about Mom," she said. "Yeah. I hate her." She sat down beside me. "For what she did. For choosing him over us. For not even saying goodbye when we walked out the door. I know. But I also miss her. And I don't know if you can do both at the same time." I put my arm around her. "I think maybe that's what family is. Feeling both things at once." I called Diane the next day. 40 minutes. Mostly silence. But in the silences, something was rebuilding. Not trust. Trust would take years if it ever came back at all. But something. A thread reconnecting. "I'm sorry," she said near the end. "I'm sorry for not standing up for you. I was so scared of being alone again that I—" Her voice broke. "There's no excuse. I know there's no excuse. But I'm sorry. Every day. I'm sorry every day. I know, Mom. Would it be okay if I came to see the cabin? What you've built?" I looked out the window at the ridge, at the trees, at the land that had once belonged to grandparents I'd never known. "Yeah," I said. "Come Saturday." She drove up the mountain in a 10-year-old Civic, navigating the same rutted access road I'd first driven, with a broken heater and $11 to my name. The road was graded and graveled now, work I'd done with my own hands, but I still remembered how it felt that first time. When she got out of the car and saw the cabin, she put her hand over her mouth. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she looked at me, and her eyes were wet, and she said, "You built all of this." "Not alone. Earl helped. Danny helped. Hannah helped. A lot of people helped." She nodded slowly. She wiped her eyes. "That's how it works, isn't it?" she said. "You can't build something real completely alone." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process, and we were only at the beginning. But it was a beginning. Rosie showed her the sketchbook. 2 years of drawings, starting from day one, a crooked cabin under a cold moon, and moving through every stage of transformation until the present day. Diane turned each page slowly, seeing the whole journey laid out in her daughter's hand. "I miss so much," she whispered. "Yeah," Rosie said, "but you're here now." That night, after Diane had driven back down the mountain, after Hannah and I had washed the dishes and Rosie had gone to bed, I found the metal lockbox again. I'd kept it on a shelf in my room, not quite ready to deal with everything inside. But that night I opened it again, and I found something I'd missed before. A hidden compartment at the bottom, revealed when I pressed on a slightly raised corner of the metal. Inside was a single envelope, yellow with age. The paper so fragile I was afraid to touch it. The handwriting on the front was shaky, uncertain. "For James and our son." I opened it with trembling hands. "My dearest James, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong. We hope we're being paranoid. We hope this letter stays hidden forever and you never need to find it. But if you do find it, we need you to know something. Whatever happened, however we left this world, you are loved. You have always been loved. You will always be loved. We know you carry weight on your shoulders that no child should carry. We see how you worry about things beyond your years. But we want you to know that none of it, none of what happens in this life, is your fault. You are our son. You are our joy. And wherever you go, whatever you become, whatever choices you make, we are proud of you. This land is yours. It will always be yours. And if someday you have children of your own, tell them their grandparents loved them before they were even born. Come home when you're ready. We'll be waiting. All our love, Mom and Dad. They'd written it in 1974, a year before the fire. They'd known somehow that their son carried guilt he shouldn't carry. They'd known he might run. And they'd left this letter, hidden where only someone who truly needed to find it would find it, telling him it was okay, telling him he could come home. But James Thornton, James Harker, never came back. He ran from this mountain and kept running his whole life. And eventually he ran from his own children too, because the weight of survival was too heavy and he didn't know any other way to put it down. I sat in that cabin that my grandparents built, reading the words they'd written nearly 50 years ago, and I cried. I cried for them, for my father, who never got to read this letter, for the family I never knew I had, and for the strange, impossible grace that had brought me back here, to this exact place, to finish something that had been waiting decades to be finished. 2 months later, an email arrived in the Thornton Ridge inbox. 3 sentences from Glenn Whitmore. I was wrong. I've been watching your videos. I'm proud of you. I read it on the porch of the cabin, the same porch I'd rebuilt from rotting boards, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not the vindication I'd imagined so many times during those cold first months when spite was sometimes the only thing that kept me going. Just nothing. Hannah came out and sat beside me. What is it? I showed her the message. Are you going to respond? I looked out at the ridge, at the trees, at the 52 acres that nobody had wanted, that had become something I couldn't have imagined. Maybe someday, I said, but not today. And that was okay, because I understood something now that I hadn't understood before. Glenn Whitmore's opinion of me, good or bad, didn't matter. It never had. The person I'd become, the things I'd built, the people I loved and who loved me back, none of that had anything to do with him. He'd kicked me out thinking I would fail. I hadn't failed, but I also hadn't succeeded to prove him wrong. I'd succeeded because there was no other option, and because I'd found people along the way who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Here's how the story ends, or how this chapter of it ends, because stories like this don't really end. They just keep becoming other stories. I turned 21 on a mountain in North Carolina, surrounded by people who loved me. Earl Maddox, 76 years old, still came by every Tuesday and Saturday to teach and build and drink bad coffee and tell stories about the old days. He'd stopped waiting for William to come home, not because he'd given up hope, but because he'd found something else to pour that hope into. Us. Danny Kowalski had become one of the better documentary filmmakers in the region, a fact that several people in the industry had started to notice. He'd bought a small house in Millbrook with money from the channel's revenue share, and he still drove up the mountain every week, even though the road was much better now. Barbara Kowalski still made the best pierogi in Henderson County and was still the person I called when I needed to know what something meant. Patricia Odom still ran the county library and still knew exactly which book a person needed. Merle Dunbar had retired from the hardware store but kept coming up the mountain to see how things were progressing, usually with some piece of equipment that had fallen off the truck. Hannah Mercer had designed the interior of our second guest cabin, which became one of the most photographed spaces on the channel. And on a cold December night, with the stars so bright you could read by them, and wood smoke rising straight up into the still air, I asked her to marry me. The ring wasn't perfect. I'd made the band myself, working from a tutorial with advice from a jeweler in Ashford named Frank Beaumont, who'd watched the channel and offered to walk me through it. The join was slightly off-center, but Hannah wore it like it was the most valuable thing she'd ever been given, because to her it was. Rosie Thornton turned 16 that year, the girl who had cried in the truck on the day we were thrown out, the girl who had climbed ladders in the freezing cold and learned to cook on a camp stove and held my hand through every moment of uncertainty, had become someone extraordinary. She had 50,000 followers of her own, documenting art and architecture in the intersection of old craft and new technology. 3 colleges were already reaching out, including one with a full scholarship offer. But more than that, she had become the heart of Thornton Ridge in ways I never could be. She was the one who answered messages from teenagers who'd been kicked out of their homes. She was the one who organized community events. She was the one who made sure Earl had someone to eat dinner with on the nights when the loneliness got too heavy. "What do you want to study?" I asked her one evening. She thought about it for a long moment. "Maybe everything," she said. "Maybe I want to learn how to build things and draw things and help people all at the same time. Is that allowed?" I put my arm around her. "After everything we've been through, I think you're allowed to do whatever you want." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Thanks for not giving up," she said quietly. "That day in the truck, when everything fell apart, thanks for not giving up on us." "I never could have," I said. "You were the reason I kept going." And that was the truth. Every cold morning, every setback, every moment when I wanted to quit, I thought of Rosie. I thought of the promise I'd silently made when I took her hand and led her out of that house on Birchwood Lane. "I will build you a home." And I had. Diane Whitmore came to visit every month now. She and Rosie were rebuilding something. Not what they'd had before, because what they'd had before wasn't worth rebuilding, but something new. Something that might, with time, become real. The workshop, Earl's workshop now officially, though my name was on the deed, had a 6-month waiting list for its traditional timber framing courses. We'd partnered with the Appalachian Craft Preservation Society. We'd earned historic designation for the property. We'd created something that would outlast us. Standing on the porch of the cabin my grandparents built, the cabin my father ran from, the cabin I'd bought for $9 without knowing any of this, I sometimes feel them with me. Eleanor and Robert Harker, who loved this mountain and died on it. James Thornton, who survived and couldn't forgive himself. And maybe, some version of myself from 2 years ago, an 18-year-old with $49 and a little sister and no idea what came next, standing in this same spot and asking whether it was possible. It was possible, not easy. Possible never means easy, but possible. People ask me what my greatest success is. 1 million subscribers? Defeating the development company? A cabin worth more than $1 million that I bought for $9? No, my greatest success is understanding this. Home isn't 4 walls. Home is the people who choose to stay when they could walk away. It's Earl teaching me to drive a nail straight. It's Barbara pressing money into Rosie's hands even when she didn't need to. It's Danny driving up the mountain every week, even though the road was terrible. It's Hannah leaving behind her whole life to build a new one with me. It's my mother sitting at my kitchen table saying, "I'm sorry," like she means it. Sometimes the thing you build to survive becomes the thing that protects everyone around you. I didn't plan that, but I'll take it. And if you're at the lowest point of your life right now, if you just got thrown out, if you've only got a few dollars to your name, if you don't know what tomorrow looks like, I want you to know something. Don't quit. You don't know who's on their way to help you. You don't know what door's about to open. You don't know what's waiting at the end of that rutted dirt road. I didn't know, and look where I ended up. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story touched something in you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Maybe they're struggling right now. Maybe they feel like nobody believes in them. Maybe they just need to know that it's possible to build something real from nothing at all. I have one last question for you. Have you ever built something from the ruins of your life? Have you ever found family and people who weren't related to you by blood? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, and your story might be the light that helps someone else find their way out of the darkness. Until next time, this is Caleb Thornton from Thornton Ridge, reminding you, the thing you're building right now, even if nobody else can see it, even if it looks like nothing but a pile of rotting logs and impossible dreams, might just be the beginning of everything. Keep building. The end.